Across the country right now, millions of Americans are making a permanent shift in where they buy their groceries. This isn't about minor tweaks to weekly routines or trying a new store once or twice. We're seeing massive supermarket chains hemorrhaging customers, and with them, billions of dollars in lost revenue, as shoppers walk away for good and never look back. For a long time, big grocery chains in the US were viewed as nearly untouchable. No matter what was happening in the economy, whether inflation was soaring or a recession was looming, people still needed to eat. Food is non-negotiable, and that reality made major retailers seem like a guaranteed bet, always positioned to come out on top. But that built-in advantage is starting to crumble, not because Americans have stopped spending altogether, but because they've changed how they think about spending. Today's shoppers are more alert, more selective, and far less patient than they used to be. They're pushing back against steep and unexplained price hikes, shrinking package sizes, declining product quality, and confusing pricing tactics disguised as inflation adjustments. Once customer loyalty evaporates, sheer size stops being a safety net. Economies of scale don't mean much when shoppers no longer trust the brand. In this video, we're jumping straight into the 7 supermarket chains facing the strongest consumer backlash right now. We'll break down the real reasons behind this growing wave of rejection. And, just as importantly, we'll look at who's stepping in to benefit when these retail giants finally stumble. Let's start by looking at the first giant. Walmart is a peculiar case. It's more than just a place to buy groceries. It functions almost like a backbone of everyday American life. You don't have to love the brand to recognize how deeply embedded it is. In fiscal year 2025 alone, Walmart pulled in roughly $681 billion in revenue. At that scale, it stops feeling like a retailer and starts resembling a small national economy of its own. Because Walmart is so massive, even the smallest operational tweaks don't stay contained. They ripple outward, affecting everything from food prices and shopping habits to how customers feel about their own safety, dignity, and treatment. Over time, though, the company's operating model began shifting in a way that made many shoppers feel less like valued customers and more like interchangeable parts in a system. Self-checkout is a perfect example. What started as a convenience quietly became the standard. Staffing levels dropped. Service desks disappeared. Shopping stopped being a simple loop. Grab what you need, pay, and head home. Instead, it turned into a process. Scanning your own items, bagging them yourself, double-checking prices, fixing errors, and monitoring the screen like a supervisor. On paper, that's technology improving efficiency. In practice, it feels like unpaid labor. Walmart is still a go-to option for families trying to stretch their budgets. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the hidden cost that comes with those lower prices. Fatigue. Shoppers come in for a short list and end up stuck in self-checkout lines that feel as long as toll booths. They pick up milk, eggs, and bread, but find themselves inspecting expiration dates like quality control workers. Then they stare at the receipt wondering, am I the customer here, or am I doing the store's accounting for free? Layer on top of that Walmart's long-standing controversies around labor practices, productivity pressure, and the way massive systems can reduce people to data points, and the experience only gets heavier. You don't have to take a political stance to see what's happening. When a business is optimized to the absolute limit, the strain doesn't stop with employees. It spills directly onto the sales floor. You feel it at understaffed help counters. You notice it in longer waits, unanswered questions, and that lingering sense that no one here has the time or permission to care anymore. The unspoken message becomes, move along, keep things flowing. This is Walmart's central contradiction. It wants to be the most convenient store for every household, but the harder it pushes efficiency, the more shopping starts to feel like work. At this point, Walmart isn't just optimizing operations, it's optimizing your patience. You're no longer paying only with dollars. You're paying with your time, your attention, and the uneasy feeling of being reduced to a cog in a massive machine. That's why the shift away from Walmart hasn't been loud or dramatic. It's been quiet and steady. People are drifting elsewhere. Some choose Costco so they can buy everything in one trip and avoid repeat visits. Others go to Aldi for a simpler experience with fewer decisions and less friction. Many seek out local or regional chains, if they're lucky enough to still have them. because they want to buy groceries without mentally gearing up as if they're clocking into another shift. So here's the question worth asking. Would you accept a future where grocery shopping feels like unpaid work? And if convenience now carries an invisible tax on your time, energy, and patience, who is that convenience really serving in the end? Kroger used to be the kind of grocery store you could visit without thinking twice. You'd drive through a quiet neighborhood, pull into the lot, walk through the sliding doors, and let muscle memory take over. Everything felt automatic, predictable, and easy. For years, Kroger functioned as America's empire of routine. It was familiar, steady, and everywhere, woven into the fabric of middle-class life. It didn't demand attention or scrutiny. It just worked. Until, suddenly, it didn't. The shift happened when shoppers stopped believing their grocery bills were simply reflecting inflation. Instead, many began to feel those numbers were reflecting something else entirely: corporate intent. During the peak of food inflation, Kroger found itself at the center of a question people had been quietly asking, but rarely said out loud. Who, exactly, is profiting from this crisis? One uncomfortable detail stood out. Reports surfaced that a Kroger pricing executive testified that, at one point, the company raised prices on staples like milk and eggs beyond what rising costs alone would justify. From there, the pieces started falling into place for customers. They saw profit margins and revenue growth in earnings reports, while they walked out of stores with fewer groceries and longer receipts. Caught in the middle were frontline employees. Shoppers voiced their frustration at the register, but pricing decisions were coming from far above. Cashiers had no authority to fix anything, no ability to override the system. You could argue at the counter all day, but those complaints would never reach the ears that mattered. Then came Kroger's proposed merger with Albertsons, which only intensified concerns. For many shoppers, fewer competitors didn't signal efficiency. It signaled higher prices and less leverage for consumers. Trust, already fragile, took another hit. The biggest blow landed through investigative reporting. In 2025, a joint investigation by The Guardian, Consumer Reports, and the Food and Environment Reporting Network alleged that Kroger customers were being overcharged due to expired sale tags and promotional labels that weren't removed on time. Test purchases showed an average overcharge of roughly $1.70 per item, about an 18% difference in documented cases. Kroger responded by saying such errors were rare when measured against billions of transactions. But for shoppers, it didn't feel rare at all. When mistakes consistently work against the customer, even in small amounts, trust starts to crack. And once that trust erodes, habit alone isn't enough to hold people in place. Kroger hasn't vanished, and it likely won't anytime soon. But in the minds of many shoppers, it now offers more than groceries. Every visit feels like a quiet test, one where you're expected to stay alert, double-check prices, and make sure you're not the one paying for someone else's margin. Whole Foods once built its entire brand on a simple but powerful promise: organic, natural, high-quality food you could trust. People didn't shop there just to pick up produce. They went to buy a feeling, the sense that they were living more thoughtfully, eating cleaner, and making better choices for themselves and the world around them. That identity began to shift in 2017 when Amazon acquired Whole Foods for about $13.7 billion. From that point on, the change wasn't sudden or dramatic, but it was steady. No one expected Whole Foods to become cheap. High prices were always part of the deal. What unsettled longtime customers was that the brand began drifting toward exactly what it once claimed it would never be: a standard supermarket, just wrapped in an organic label. The first cracks showed up on the shelves. Many local brands and niche products, the very things that gave Whole Foods its personality, started disappearing. The stores still looked polished and bright, but they felt hollow, like a space that had been cleaned so thoroughly it lost its character. Then came the labor story, which weighed even heavier. Whole Foods used to be known for treating employees better than the industry norm. There was a sense of autonomy and respect. But after becoming part of Amazon's larger logistics ecosystem, many workers described a shift: from trust to surveillance, from flexibility to performance metrics, from people to numbers. For a company that sold ethical consumption as part of its value, this change landed hard. That sense of unease deepened when Whole Foods became associated with broader controversies around Amazon's labor practices. Reports, including coverage by Reuters, referenced an NLRB ruling involving Amazon's mandatory anti-union meetings, leading many customers to see Whole Foods as inseparable from the same corporate machinery. For a brand rooted in moral credibility, that connection cut deeper than any price hike ever could. But the sharpest blow to trust came from pricing itself. Whole Foods agreed to pay $500,000 to settle allegations in New York City over overcharging customers due to mislabeled prepackaged goods. In plain terms, shoppers were already paying a premium, and in some cases, they were being charged even more than that premium justified. When something like that happens at a store built on trust, it stops feeling like a clerical error. It feels like a broken promise. Slowly, Whole Foods has been losing more than customers. It's been losing its identity and the loyalty of people who once defended its prices because they believed in its mission. The question now lingers uncomfortably. Can a brand preach ethics while operating like a cold, hyper-optimized machine? And when you pay top dollar at the checkout, are you really buying food? Or are you buying the hope that this system is still, somehow, humane? Target didn't lose shoppers because its shelves were empty. It lost them for a far more unsettling reason. It lost the feeling of normalcy. In 2023, Target publicly confirmed it was closing certain locations, openly admitting that rising theft and ongoing security concerns made it impossible to operate those stores safely or sustainably. When a retailer reaches that point, the issue goes beyond business. It signals that something fundamental about everyday life has shifted. The irony is hard to miss. Target was once the place people escaped to when life felt heavy. It was the cheerful retail playground of the American middle class. Bright lights, clean aisles, orderly shelves, and an atmosphere that made everything feel under control. You'd walk in and instantly relax. Target sells a lot of products, but what it really sold was ease. You'd grab a few necessities and somehow leave with extra items you never planned to buy. That kind of harmless indulgence felt like a small reward for living in a stable world. Over time, that feeling started to fade. Target gradually became exhausting instead of enjoyable. Everyday essentials were locked behind glass. Clear cabinets spread through the store like barriers. Buying something simple now meant pressing a button, waiting for an employee, and standing there as if you were requesting special permission. What used to be effortless turned into a process. The media has pointed out how this creates a damaging loop. Locking up merchandise may reduce losses in the short term, but it also erodes the customer experience. Shoppers get irritated, visits take longer, and many people simply stop coming back. As foot traffic drops, stores respond by becoming even more restrictive. It's a cycle that feeds itself, like a home that once welcomed guests but slowly transformed into a guarded compound out of fear. The problem is simple. No one wants to shop for toothpaste in a fortress. If you had to wait for someone to unlock a glass case just to buy a basic item, how long would your patience last? And in the end, what is Target really protecting more? The products behind the glass, or the trust and goodwill of the people walking through the doors? There's an unspoken rule in retail. Convenience isn't optional. Once it disappears, customers quietly follow it out the door. People are usually willing to tolerate higher prices, as long as those prices are straightforward and honest. That's exactly where Safeway and Albertsons begin to lose customers. The issue isn't that they're always the most expensive option. It's that shopping there can feel like stepping into a system where prices aren't fixed numbers anymore, but variables you're expected to double-check. At first, it doesn't spark anger, it creates caution. And when that caution becomes a permanent habit, people eventually walk away. For a long time, Safeway and Albertsons were classic American supermarkets. Familiar, predictable, almost comforting. You'd go in out of routine without planning ahead. No apps to open, no codes to scan, no math to do in your head. You grabbed what you needed, paid, and left. It was simple, and that simplicity was the appeal. Then modern retail layered complexity onto something that never needed it. Card-only discounts, app-exclusive pricing, weekly digital coupons, loyalty points, buy two get one offers, a forest of price tags stacked and overlapping like roadside billboards. When shoppers have to decode a store just to understand what something costs, the store has already failed its most basic job, making buying easy. Some of the concerns aren't just about perception anymore. In Sonoma County, officials announced that Safeway, Albertsons, and Vons agreed to pay $396,200 to settle allegations of overcharging customers above the lowest advertised price and misrepresenting product weights. Yes, it was a settlement, not a criminal verdict. But in the minds of many shoppers, the takeaway was simple. They were caught. And once trust is caught, it stops being trust. The real danger lies in how these issues appear. They don't look like a single explosive scandal that fades with time. They feel more like a leak inside the walls. At first, you don't notice it. Then you hear a drip, an expired discount tag still hanging, an item ringing up a little higher than expected, a meat package listing the wrong weight. None of these will empty your bank account in one visit, but together, they quietly drain confidence week after week. Safeway and Albertsons still sell groceries, but unintentionally, they also sell something else: the habit of auditing your receipt. You don't leave the store carrying only bags of food. You leave carrying a lingering doubt. Did I get overcharged this time? So here's the uncomfortable question. If a store gets prices right 98% of the time, but the remaining 2% consistently works in its favor, is that really an error? Or is it a system that has learned how to profit from customer exhaustion? Stop and Shop used to be the kind of supermarket you barely noticed, and that was the point. You'd drop in almost automatically, grab a few essentials, head home, and move on with your day. It worked like an old kitchen clock. Nothing fancy, never exciting, but reliable enough to quietly keep life moving on schedule. Then came the moment when people started to notice that the clock wasn't ticking quite as smoothly anymore. Not because shoppers suddenly ran out of money, but because the system itself began to lose momentum. In 2024, Stop and Shop announced plans to close 32 underperforming locations before the end of the year as part of a restructuring effort aimed at future growth. When a grocery chain shutters dozens of stores at once, it's more than a logistical adjustment. It's a subtle admission that some neighborhoods are no longer worth serving the way they once were. From there, the slow drift began. You walk into a Stop and Shop now and everything feels slightly off-tempo. Fewer checkout lanes are open. Lines stretch longer than they should. Employees appear stretched thin, moving quickly but never quite catching up. Shelves sometimes look picked over, as if the store is constantly recovering from yesterday instead of ready for today. The risk for Stop and Shop is that its entire identity is built on habit. But habits only survive when they feel effortless. Once friction creeps in, customers stop acting like routine shoppers and start thinking like cautious investors. They read the signals and pull out early. If stores in nearby neighborhoods can disappear, people naturally ask themselves, why should I stay loyal here? Trust in retail can be as fragile as a shortcut. The moment you suspect it might be blocked, you don't wait to find out. You choose another route. Stop and Shop once lived up to its name. Stop in, shop, move on. Now, for many customers, it feels more like stop already, followed by a quiet decision to turn around and leave. It's not that Stop and Shop has become unusable. You can still buy groceries there. The problem is more subtle and more damaging. It no longer delivers the smooth, low-effort experience people expect from a routine grocery run. Maybe the chain will recover through restructuring, sharper pricing, or investments in the customer experience. Maybe it will simply shrink in order to survive. But for shoppers, the real question is simple. Do you still want to build your habits around a place that seems to be steadily cutting pieces of itself away? Dollar General tells a deeply American story, not because it's exciting or aspirational, but because it shows up where America is often overlooked. Small towns, rural highways, outer suburbs, places where choice exists more as an idea than a reality. Dollar General offers a blunt, practical promise. Nearby, inexpensive, and quick. You don't shop there for pleasure. You shop there because you have to. And when it becomes the only store within miles, it stops being just retail. It becomes a lifeline. But low prices always come with a cost, and that cost doesn't only live on the price tag. It's built into how the store operates. At Dollar General, those operational trade-offs piled up long enough that federal regulators stepped in. OSHA announced a company-wide settlement with Dollar General that included roughly $12 million in fines along with mandated safety improvements. After that, it became harder to look at the stores the same way. Walk into a Dollar General and you'll notice narrow aisles, towering shelves, and very few employees on the floor. At first glance, it looks cluttered or chaotic. But look closer, and it feels more like a calculation. How many stores can you operate? How many products can you move? And how little can you spend doing it? When cost-cutting becomes the core logic, safety is often treated as optional rather than essential. What makes Dollar General different from the other chains is that walking away isn't always possible. In many communities, there is no alternative nearby. No competitor down the street. No second option across town. That's why this isn't just a story about frustrated shoppers. It's a question about how our systems are structured. Why do the areas with the fewest choices so often end up with the most compromised shopping experiences? And why does cheap so often translate into inconvenience, risk, and stress that poorer communities are expected to absorb? Dollar General sells affordability. But sometimes the real price is paid in something more valuable than money: peace of mind. Not everyone has the freedom to stop going there. Those who do often try to consolidate trips elsewhere, even if it means driving farther, just to reduce how often they have to step into that environment. When a community has only one option, can it still be called a free market? And if low prices come bundled with safety concerns and chronic stress, who is really paying for that cheapness in the long run? After shoppers drifted away from Walmart due to burnout, from Kroger because of pricing distrust, from Whole Foods after losing faith in its mission, and from Target when shopping started to feel like asking permission to open a glass case, one question remains: where do people go next? What's interesting is that many shoppers aren't chasing the absolute lowest price anymore. They're searching for something else entirely: reliability. Because right now, the most expensive thing isn't food. The real cost is the feeling that the system is quietly working against you, and that there's nothing you can do to push back. One of the first alternatives people usually bring up is Costco. Costco doesn't claim it will beat every other store on price, item by item. What it offers instead is something far less common right now: predictability. Shopping at Costco feels like entering a quiet contract. You buy in larger quantities, you shop less often, and in exchange, you're spared the mental noise. There's no coupon chasing, no second guessing whether today's price is a trick or a typo. Costco sells value the old-fashioned way. You pay a membership fee, walk through the doors, and understand the rules up front. Strangely enough, in a time when shelf prices feel unreliable everywhere else, Costco restores faith not in discounts, but in structure. That said, bulk buying isn't for everyone. Not everyone has the space, the budget, or the desire to load up months at a time. That's where Aldi enters the picture. Aldi feels like a reset button for modern retail. Fewer products, minimal decoration, almost no promotional clutter. You don't need a phone app to unlock fair prices. You don't need to sign up for a loyalty system that feels like filling out paperwork. Aldi doesn't try to manage your behavior. It gives you back control. And for many shoppers, that simplicity is exactly the relief they're looking for. Sometimes what people want most isn't endless choice or clever marketing. It's a store that lets them walk in, grab what they need, pay, and leave without feeling mentally exhausted. In that sense, Aldi isn't just cheaper, it's calmer. Then there's Trader Joe's, which plays an entirely different game. Trader Joe's doesn't compete aggressively on price. Instead, it competes on atmosphere. It wins people over with friendliness, personality, and a shopping experience that feels unusually gentle. Where others focus on efficiency or savings, Trader Joe's focuses on making the trip itself feel human. Trader Joe's is the kind of store that reminds you there are still real people on the other side of the transaction. It's not flawless, and it doesn't try to be. What sets it apart is that it doesn't make you feel like you're battling a system just to buy dinner. Many shoppers don't switch to Trader Joe's purely for the groceries. They go because the experience itself feels considerate, almost kind, and that has quietly become a luxury. In a country where grocery shopping increasingly feels like another task on a never-ending to-do list, a store that actually lifts your mood turns into more than a stop. It becomes a destination. So it raises an honest question. If you had to choose, would you chase the lowest possible price, or would you pay a little more to avoid feeling drained? And are Americans really boycotting only because of money, or because they're trying to reclaim something older and deeply valuable? The ability to buy food without staying on constant alert? At its core, This wave of boycotts isn't just about rising prices, it's about trust. People can tolerate higher costs for a time, but what wears them down is being pulled into systems where the rules keep shifting, where responsibility is quietly pushed onto the customer, and every grocery run feels like a test you didn't sign up to take. Eventually, it's not the bill that breaks loyalty. It's the exhaustion of always having to be on guard. When that pattern repeats for long enough, people don't need to explode in anger. They simply slip away. And that quiet exit is what retailers should fear the most. When customers stop complaining, it doesn't mean they're satisfied. It means they've already decided to move on. If I had to sum up this moment in one line, it would be this. Americans aren't chasing the lowest price anymore. They're searching for the most dependable experience. Sometimes paying a little more actually costs less in the long run because it protects your most valuable resources, your time and your trust. So what do you think is really driving these boycotts? Is it hatred toward specific brands, or exhaustion with an entire system that feels stacked against the customer? Have you ever walked out of a grocery store feeling like you just clocked out of another shift? And if given the choice, what would you value more? Slightly cheaper prices, or clearer, more honest ones? If you find this kind of analysis useful, not to stir panic, but to better understand how the system actually works, please tap like to show your support. Share it with a friend who's always venting about grocery shopping. Lately, even a simple supermarket trip feels strange to me. And if you want me to keep breaking down stories from American retail, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Just a quick note. This video is created for informational purposes only, offering market context based on press reports and publicly available sources. It is not financial, medical, or legal advice. Individual experiences may vary depending on location, timing, and specific store conditions. If you have your own experience, good or bad, drop it in the comments. I read them, and there's a good chance your story will help someone else make sense of what they're seeing too.